The
Okay.
problem with a debit card is that you don't have the protection that you do with the credit card.
That's true. So don't let it get stolen. All right.
So I am wired here. If we don't unplug me, go ahead.
All right. Well, let's see. So, Tom, can people hear me all right if he's standing right there? Okay. Well, welcome everybody out in streaming land, and welcome to everyone here tonight. Let me first of all mention next week, Monday, September 18th at 7 p.m. will be our final lecture in the Interpreter Foundation Turkey Sacred Sites Tour. And it's going to be a great lecture. Gay Strathern, some insights into the development of Christianity in Asia Minor. So this is where we'll go into things like Peter, John, Paul, some of the early church fathers, and how the church developed in its early years. So we have tonight Kent Jackson talking primarily about the 7 churches of Revelation, and then Gay Strathern will be kind of picking up the rest of it for the Acts of the Apostles, things going on there in Turkey. So you won't want to miss that. It's really a great way to prepare for us to go to Turkey, but also a great way to prepare to read the remainder of the chapters and letters that we have in our Come Follow Me lessons in church. So let me introduce Kent Jackson, who will be speaking about the 7 churches of Revelation. Kent P. Jackson retired in June of 2017 as a professor of religion at Brigham Young University, where he taught since 1980. He has a bachelor's degree in ancient studies from BYU and a master's degree and PhD degrees in Near Eastern Studies from the University of Michigan. His research interests include the Near East and the intersection of the Latter-day Saint faith and the Bible. He's authored or edited Joseph Smith's commentary on the Bible, Joseph Smith's new translation of the Bible, original manuscripts, and a Bible reader's history of the ancient world. Jackson is a former Associate Dean of Religion and former Associate Director of the Brigham Young University's Jerusalem Center for Near Eastern Studies. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Professor Jackson.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you in person and remotely today. Pleasure to talk about the Scriptures always. We have been very blessed this past year to be studying the New Testament, and what a privilege that has been. My job tonight is to give you visual images that will stay in your brains, hopefully, to help us envision a physical setting for the things that we read in the New Testament. So the New Testament epistles, where we are now in our reading, were written to people in a specific period of time, in a specific place, and it will help us understand them if we are able to see those places and see similar places in our minds so that we know what life was like then. We will focus on the 7 churches of Asia. At the beginning of the book of Revelation, the Lord tells John that he was going to give them a message for 7 churches. And here's how John records his experience. I, John, your brother, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, saying, "Write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches." John was on the island of Patmos. This is the island of Patmos, which still exists today. It's a small island. You're basically looking in this picture at the whole island. There's no natural water source on this island. And during the days of the Roman Emperor Domitian, it was a penal colony, and that probably explains why John tells us that he was sent there on behalf of his testimony of Jesus. There's a Greek Orthodox monastery at the top of the hill that marks what the local believers believe is the very spot where John's revelation was received. In fact, the very cave where it was received, and inside the area that you can see there with the railing is, back to the railing. All right, we're not going backwards here, tech guy.
Okay, sorry.
Inside the railing, there's actually a depression in the wall that's supposed to be the place where John was leaning his head when the revelation came to him. And that shows the strength of some of the traditions attached to sacred events in many places in the Holy Land. The Roman Empire at the time of the revelation was not quite as big as what you see here, but almost as big. You can see that the Holy Land is down here, a tiny little corner of the Roman Empire, and the Roman province of Asia was in the western part of what's now called Turkey, and that was the area to which the revelation was addressed. This shows us a closer view. Again, the Holy Land is down here. Here's Jerusalem, Caesarea, and the Roman province of Asia is here. It's interesting that most of Paul's missionary labors took place in what is now Turkey. These were Greek-speaking places, part of the Greek cultural spreading that had taken place, and many of these places that we'll visit here had Jewish populations in them that had scattered years earlier out of the Holy Land. We are going to look at what cities looked like in the days of Paul and John, and then we'll see the examples of the 7 churches. So cities in New Testament times did not look like this. This is actually an important New Testament city, but it didn't look like this because it's not there anymore, at least above ground, though most of it is probably still underground. Nor did cities look like this. When people travel to places, scriptural sites and ancient historical sites in the Mediterranean area and the Middle East, they kind of learn to envision the world as being a big open air place. But this is not what cities looked like in the days of John and the book of Revelation. This is what it looks like today. This is what cities looked like. There were roofs everywhere. Roofs everywhere. There were buildings, there were open air plazas, but those open air plazas were almost always surrounded by roofs so that there was shade in the cities and protection from the rain. The roofs haven't lasted, as you can see. Streets were a big deal. In the Roman Empire, so every part of the New Testament takes place within the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, a responsible city would have very nicely paved streets. The major streets would be paved. This is the city of Scythopolis in what's now Israel. And you can see that the street is paved with, this is basalt, this black rock. Basalt is volcanic rock that can withstand all the traffic. And you look at that, this has been excavated by archaeologists. This is in darn good shape for being 2,000 years old. And then a typical street would have pavement like you can see here. And this one has a water channel that runs underneath it to collect the rainwater. And then you would see a curb and a gutter, and then you would see a step up on either side to the sidewalks. Then you're going to have to envision this because once again the roofs are gone, but above the sidewalk to the right and to the left of the picture were roofs. that extended from the columns that you can see to the right and to the left in order to provide shade on the sidewalk. This is a standard practice all over the Roman Empire for a serious, respectable city with a serious, respectable street. So you've got the street in the middle for the vehicular traffic. Then you have curb and gutter. You step up to the sidewalk on the right and on the left of this, and the sidewalks would be in the shade with roofs that extend from the columns to the shops. So starting in the middle, you've got street, curb and gutter, sidewalk, and then shops. Okay? Here's another example. This one's from Basra in Syria. You can see a nicely paved street. Once again, that street's 2,000 years old. It hasn't been uncovered all this time, but it has for most of those 2,000 years. So you see a nice street, a curb and a gutter there. Then you see steps going up to the sidewalk, and then there would have been a roof that extended from the columns. So the street will not be covered by a roof, right? But the sidewalk will. So the roof extends from the columns to the shops that were on the right side of this column here. And can you see in the picture, between each of the columns, you have a drain for the rain runoff to run down into the storm sewer underneath the sidewalk. Very common kind of thing, even in places where rain is fairly rare, there would be accommodations to cover the rain. Here's another example. This one's in Tarsus, Paul's hometown in Turkey. You can see the basalt street, hard volcanic rock, and you can see a limestone gutter. And this is about all of the antiquities that you're going to see there in Paul's hometown of Tarsus, but a beautiful example of how street engineering worked. Now, what do you have on the sidewalks? Well, much of the time you're just going to have limestone sidewalks, just limestone paving. But very often, it would be very desirable to have mosaics. Both of these mosaics are from Ephesus, but they can be found in many, many other Roman cities throughout the whole ancient Roman world. So this is what it looked like on the sidewalk. Now, from these pictures that we've seen so far, you can get a sense of how the Romans valued civic improvements like this that gave beauty and dignity to their cities. Your city would be praised and well respected, and it will attract business if the place looks lovely and respectable, like what we see here. So when we think of Paul spending a year and a half in Corinth, that's the kind of environment where he was living. When we think of him spending a couple of years in Ephesus, or John in Ephesus, or wherever John was, they would be in places that were distinguished by these kinds of civic improvements. Here's another beautiful example. And notice how the stone, this one's in Sepphoris in Israel. Notice how the stones are placed diagonally on the street, so they're not going to trip you up too much when you're going down on your cart. And then you can see on either side, you have beautiful mosaic sidewalks that once existed. So I showed you the pictures of the first of two places. One that hasn't been excavated yet, it was just a field, and the other one that's been excavated, and all that's visible there is this kind of stuff. Why is this stuff not here? Because when the next guys came in, they needed building supplies. And where are you going to find building supplies? It's in the Roman city that may or may not be half abandoned by the time you get there. And so all over the Mediterranean area, medieval buildings are built out of the remains of buildings from biblical times. A respectable town would have a monumental arch in it. Not a respectable town, let me say respectable city would have a monumental arch. Now, during the time of the apostles in the New Testament, Rome was at peace just about everywhere inside the borders of the Roman Empire. And so they weren't building walls around cities. They were on the fringes, on the frontiers of the Roman Empire, but not in these places that we have in the New Testament. So a lot of the monumental gates were simply decorative. This one's from Bosra in Syria, but it's very, very typical. Your bridge, your monumental gate would have, so you can imagine in many places there would be a city wall that extends out in either direction from this gate that you can see, and it would be a real gate. But in some cases, they just build them in the middle of cities because they looked cool. But they typically would have 3 entryways through the gate. Why? Well, the one in the middle is for the vehicular traffic and the street, and the one on the left is for the sidewalk on the left, and the one on the right is for the sidewalk on the right. And this is a standard pattern all over the Roman Empire. I've seen some gates like this where you go inside the pedestrian ways on the 2 sidewalks, and you have to make a kind of a jog to turn to get through there. I think that's probably because they want to make sure who you were before they let you into the town. Here's another one. This one dates from a little while after the time of the book of Revelation. This is in Jerash in Jordan. Same kind of thing. Big, gorgeous, beautiful monumental gate with a large, wide, tall entryway for the street, and then the 2 sidewalks just continue on into the city. Now, a respectable city in Roman times would have a main street that goes north and south, and it's called the Cardo, which comes from the same Latin root as cardiologist and things like that. It goes through the heart of the city. And then there would be a major east-west street called the Decumanus. And in the middle of those would be typically the middle of town. Now, when I say typically, most towns, most cities began before Roman times, and so the Romans sometimes retrofitted the architecture of the town to fit their traditional taste for cities. But many cities were built on a pattern like this. The Romans and the Greeks before them invented the pattern of square blocks, east and west, north and south. We attribute that to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, but they were 2,000 years after other people did it. But, as you know, a whole lot of towns are built on hills, and it's very hard to do that. But a good, respectable city is going to have a north-south Cardo, an east-west Decumanus. Now, what do you do in the middle where they come together? You build some magnificent thing like this. So this is a monument. This one's in Palmyra in Syria, and this is the spot in which the east, west, and north-south main streets come together. Here's, this is very, very lovely one in a place called Aphrodisias in Turkey, where you can just imagine the traffic coming on this street into here, coming out the other side over there, and traffic coming from this street into here. Now, in reality, these were more decorative than anything else, and there would be a circle, some kind of a roundabout around many of them. So, but this is something that one could see, and then, once again, in all directions, east, west, north-south, you're going to have paved streets going out from this spot with covered sidewalks along the way. Another feature that a self-respecting city would have is called an agora. The New Testament and the King James translation sometimes translate this as market. Market doesn't work very well for this. Agora, the Latin word for this is forum, and the Greek word is agora. And agora is a public square of some sort, like the one you can see in this picture. And the squares could be used for selling things, so it could be the equivalent of a mall, but oftentimes they were used for ceremonial functions or just for recreation. So imagine this thing that we are seeing here. This is from Pella or Perga in Turkey. This is a walkway here, or a road. To the right of it would be shops, and as you can imagine, there would be a roof going from these columns covering the shops. So this thing would be roofed. And this road goes all the way around the square agora like this. So there would be stores all around it behind the sidewalks. So this one would be a good market kind of agora. This one's in Philippi in Greece. It's an enormous agora. This was a big important city. But this one had the same kinds of things. It had a sidewalk that went all the way around it that was roofed. But inside of this, there were a lot of monumental and ceremonial kinds of buildings in this particular agora. Some of you may be familiar with this one here. This is in Athens. This is the monumental agora in Athens. This picture was taken from Mars Hill. And this whole square here was used for temples, like this one here, and all kinds of monuments and things. Here's another agora, also in Athens. This one was a commercial agora in Roman times, namely an open square that could be that would have a covered porch all the way around it that would be used for marketing. Now, what did houses look like? Poor people lived in poor houses. And we don't have a lot of examples of those archaeologically because they're not very interesting to excavate, apparently. And also they're made out of less durable materials. But this is a lovely example here. This is from Duga in Tunisia, of what an upper class Roman period house looked like. This kind of house that Paul and John and others would have seen many times. Now the roof is missing, obviously. Upper class Roman houses had the yard inside the house, not outside the house. Outside the house there would be one entranceway into the house, and maybe another one for animals, but you wouldn't be able to see whether it was rich or poor people that lived inside, because from the outside street all you see is a wall. But what do you see inside here? They would typically have an open courtyard in the middle, not covered by a roof. This part here would be covered by a roof, but this might be a pond, or there might be a fountain in this, or there might be a well in this. And then from this corridor in the house, which would be covered by a roof, the rooms of the house go in like that. That's what houses looked like in Roman times. Here's one that's been reconstructed, and I can't remember where this one is, but this is another example of what they look like. Here's one from Herculaneum, covered by Mount Vesuvius, that still has the mosaic sidewalk inside of it. I'm calling this a sidewalk. This is actually a hall inside the house, right? The rooms go off to the side, and some of this roof is still intact here. So these would be lovely places that would have internal shade and hopefully even water. Another thing a self-respecting town would have is a theater. These were a big part of Greek culture. This is the theater in Epidauros in Greece. This is the biggest preserved one from antiquity. In Greek times, the theaters were built up against hillsides, like this one, with an open view in the front. The Romans changed the pattern, as we'll see in just a moment here. But these were used for, they had excellent acoustics, at least as excellent as you can get without the electrical blessings that we enjoy today. And these would be for plays, for public meetings, and even for demonstrations, as we see in the book of Acts. We'll come back to that one later. In Roman times, instead of building steps up onto a hillside like this one, they built self-contained buildings like this. This is in Aspendos in Turkey. This is one of the best preserved ones from the Roman world. It looks as good as the Marriott Center or any other kind of place here. Inside here there are what do you call those things? Concourses, there are tunnels that take you to different parts. It's just an amazing thing. In Roman times, they built a big backdrop in the front of it, and so you can't daydream by looking out over the sea or something. Here's another view of the same one. Here's another one. This is from Bosra in Syria. Same kind of thing, in darn good shape for being 2,000 years old. Now, if you were a really fancy city, you would have something called an amphitheater. An amphitheater is a double theater. A theater is a half circle. An amphitheater is two half circles together. Our modern word amphitheater misses the meaning of the word. And an amphitheater looks like this. So just imagine two half circles put together. They don't create a circle, it's more oblong. What do you call that? An ellipse? Oh, no, it's an oval of some sort. This one is in Scythopolis in Israel, and these were ideal for the games, as the Romans called them. The games with the animals, the gladiators, which are all over the Roman Empire, the wild animal games where people would fight against animals. This is a fairly humble one on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. This one is in El Jem in Tunisia, and you can see this is pretty darn fancy amphitheater. And the most famous amphitheater in the world is the Flavian Amphitheater in Rome that gets called the Colosseum, and that's what it was used for. In addition to that, you would have a hippodrome. Hippodrome, hippo means horse in Greek. A hippodrome is basically a racetrack. This gorgeously preserved one is in Aphrodisias in Turkey. You can see the seats are still there. You can imagine yourself walking into the tunnel into this and taking your seat. Everybody has a pretty good view in here. And these were for races, horse races, chariot races, and so forth. Now remember, this is before TV, before your phone, before electronic music, before any of this stuff. People were very, very much into the games and the races and things like that. This is a really big one. So this is an average size one. This is a humongous one. This is in Tyre in Lebanon. And this huge one here is in Caesarea in Israel. Now they also had temples because you've got deities, of course, that need to be worshipped. And most temples in the Roman world were based on more or less the same architectural pattern that was used beginning with the Greeks throughout the Roman Empire. This one is in Douga in Tunisia. This one is in Palmyra in Syria. You had to have temples because you needed the protection of the gods in order to preserve the well-being of your city. And in these temples, they would have altars made for offerings, and with the leftover meat in the offerings, what would they do with it? Sell it in the meat market for the Christians to get really stressed over whether they could eat meat offered that had once been offered to idols. If you were really an important city and really fortunate, you could petition the emperor to let you have a temple to Augustus and Rome. Rome and Augustus. Rome, the god, Augustus, the former emperor, now a god. And that gave your city a great deal of prestige if you were allowed to build a temple to Rome and Augustus. Another thing you would have is a bathhouse. Public bathhouses were a big deal. Some cities were built close to hot springs, but most weren't, so they had to heat the water. And since people didn't typically have bathing facilities within their own homes, they would go to the public bathhouse, and that's where people would hang out a lot. So there are a lot of bathhouses preserved with pools of hot and cold water all over the Roman Empire. And how did they heat them? Well, they built huge furnaces on the sides of the bathhouses, and they suspended the floor on these brick pylons, built the plaster floor across those so they could blast superheated air underneath the floors of the hot rooms. And in some cases, a floor like this would be covered and then water would be put on it, so you would have a heated pool. So in your bathhouse, you would have a frigidarium, which means cold room, and a caldarium, which is hot room, and you would have a tepidarium, which would be what? A lukewarm room, a tepid room. Some of these, because these were major public structures, would have gorgeous interiors. This one is from Caesarea in Palestine. And then there would be other accommodations, like public accommodations, like this one is in Aspendos in Turkey, where this is an aqueduct that led from way up here in the mountains, in the Taurus Mountains, crossed this valley, came down here. You can imagine what this looked like when it was all intact. It just must have been an engineering marvel to bring fresh water into the city. This is in Pompeii. Notice the beautifully paved street there. This is a public water source here that anybody could come and get water from. And then all over the Roman world, you can see examples of public toilets. I think this is the best preserved one that I have ever seen. This one's in Douga in Tunisia. All right, so those will give us an idea. So we're going to look at the 7 churches now and see some of these same kinds of features. So the Lord commands John, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus and to Smyrna and to Pergamum and to Thyatira and to Sardis and to Philadelphia and to Laodicea. So those are the 7 churches. Now notice where they are in this map. So this is the Roman province of Asia, which became, as far as we know, the center of Christianity by the end of the 1st century of Christianity. Now here they are in order: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. So you can see that they're all in a circle. Now why 7? Well, 7 often symbolically means everything. And so perhaps the thought was on the part of the Lord and his revelator is to say, what I say to 7, I say to all. But these were real branches of the church. So here's what the Lord says to Ephesus. I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance, and how you cannot bear with those who are evil, but have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not, and found them to be false. I know you are enduring patiently and bearing up for my name's sake, and you have not grown weary. Great compliment on the part of the Lord. Evidence of apostasy in the messages to the 7 churches. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen, repent and do the works you did at first. If not, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place, unless you repent. Now, Ephesus was one of the major cities in the Roman Empire. It was a gorgeous place. It's one of the best places to visit anywhere in the ancient world. Well-preserved streets. We're just going to take a quick tour through the city here. Monumental fountain. Now, unfortunately, all we have is what archaeologists were able to find under the ground that builds up over the course of the centuries after the city falls apart. This was a monumental fountain in the upper part of the city. It provided water for the people there and led to water channels that would flow down to the lower part of the city. This wonderful street that goes down. Now, you know more about streets now, right? So you can imagine you've got the columns on the sides, you've got the sidewalk there. Archaeologists, there's not enough money in the world for archaeologists to do everything, right? So this may never not look like this does here. But on the left side down there, on the bottom of the street, they're working their way up on the sidewalk and finding beautiful mosaics. So, but they would have been right and left. Here's down below, looking up the same street. I should add that most tours begin at the top and go down, right? Rather than the other way around. Notice the striations in the stones on the street to provide a little more traction for them. It's very helpful. Limestone is very strong and durable here, or marble, whatever this is here, but it's slippery as can be. So this is down at the bottom, looking up. Archaeologists are excavating the sidewalk, and what are they finding? They're finding beautiful mosaics along the sidewalk, and again, this would have been covered across the top there. Along the way, they found the remains of various temples, including that one and including this one here. If you visit there, hope that you're not there right when a cruise ship docks nearby, or it will look like this. Down at the bottom of the street is the remains, on the left, the remains of the Library of Celsus. Gorgeous, beautiful, fantastic, wonderful building there with a monumental gate that leads into the Agora on the right. Beautifully paved street with a big retaining wall on the left in pretty darn good shape for being 2,000 years old. A magnificent Agora that's very, very big, as you can see, and this would have been used for commercial things as well as for monumental kinds of things, statues, temples, things like that. And around the side here, there's enough work there for archaeologists for the next generation, just on this one side here, but there's so much more. Houses. Here you see the inner courtyard of a house. You know what houses look like now, so you can imagine that these columns held up a roof that covered the walkway that went around the inside of the house, with a pool here in the middle, with the rooms going off from the walkway. The Turkey has built over the main upper-class residential section of the city. They built a roof over it so that they could preserve the frescoes and the mosaics that are there. So this is what is underneath that roof. Is your tour going to go to the terrace houses?
Yes.
You can see the beautiful Frescoes painted on the walls. You can see the original walls. Look at this gorgeous thing. So here you've got your pool in the middle of the house with the two things at the bottom of the picture are fountains that poured the water out. You have the walkway going around and the rooms coming out of the sides. Just absolutely beautiful. Now, Ephesus was the place of the goddess Artemis. Artemis was, she was not the Greek goddess Artemis, nor was she the goddess Diana, as we have in the King James translation, but she was a local Anatolian goddess who represented nature. So on her chest, she's got lots of eggs, probably bees' eggs, and then up and down her body, she has all kinds of wild animals preserved. This is one of the magnificent theaters of all of the ancient world here in Ephesus. There's a wonderful story in Acts where Paul had converted so many people to the gospel that the silversmiths who made images for Diana were losing money. So they started to riot, and they came into the city and chanted against Paul. And of course, Paul wanted to go out and meet the crowd, right? But his assistants hustled him out of town for his own protection. But this is the very theater, the very place where it took place. Artemis's temple was one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was a huge, wonderful temple, and here it is today. It is in the rainy season, it's a swamp. In the drier season, there's only a smaller swamp. As Christianity replaced traditional ancient religions there, the Christians recycled its materials. And so up on the hill here, we have the Church of St. John. It was built out of marble that was pillaged out of the Temple of Artemis. Here's the rest of the swamp here. And then when Christianity was replaced by Islam, they built the Isa Bey Mosque here out of the remains of the Church of St. John. That's what happens. These are from the British Museum, some of the gorgeous, beautiful column drums, of which there were dozens in the Temple of Artemis. And probably later people took these column drums and just chopped them up to build foundation stones for their houses in town. The Church of St. John here is important because of the tradition that John the Revelator was buried here. His tomb is here under the altar, is believed to be here under the altar of the temple, or altar of the church that bears his name. And the other great church in Ephesus is this one, the Church of St. Mary, where one of the councils took place. So it's a very important place, with a separate baptistry building and a nice little baptismal font in it. So what happened to Ephesus? Here we have the street, this is Harbor Street. It's the street that goes down to the harbor. But the trouble was that the river, during the heyday of Ephesus's glory, the river filled in with silt. And so that meant that the coastline, which once was right here, is now 5 or 6 miles away. And because of that, Ephesus just died. It was no longer a viable commercial city. It no longer had a port, and it died. Let's go to the next one, Smyrna. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are of a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison that you may be tested. For 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Smyrna today is still called Smyrna. It's called the Izmir in Turkey. It's Turkey's second or third biggest city. The only thing to see there in terms of history is an agora that's been exposed here. in the middle of the city, still working on it. These pictures are, I haven't been there for 15 years or so, so I'm sure they've done a lot more since then. Underground passages under the Agora, and of course, beautiful artifacts. The next one, so that was Smyrna. Now we go to Pergamum, which is another one of the grand sites. I know where you dwell, the Lord said, where Satan's throne is, yet you hold fast my name, and you did not deny my faith, even the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. So the Lord calls this city, Pergamum, the place where Satan dwells. That's not too complimentary. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to put stumbling block before the sons of Israel, so that they might eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality. So in the book of Revelation, the Lord draws from events in the Old Testament to use them as metaphors for the state of the people there. Pergamum is a gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful ancient site built on top of a mountain. There's still a city there. The Turkish city here is still called Pergamum, Bergama in Turkish. It's built up on a mountain, and it's one of the beautiful places. This spot here is probably the most important spot in Pergamum. This is where there was a massive altar to Zeus. And some New Testament scholars believe that this is called the place where Satan lived because of the massive altar to sacrifice to Zeus. And only the foundation stones of this still exist today because the German archaeologists, after they excavated it, stole it and took it to Berlin. So it's now in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin, Germany. A gorgeous big piece of Hellenistic Greek art there and statuary, now in a museum in Berlin. They are remodeling the museum, and it's not scheduled to be open again until 2036. I have no idea what would take them that many years to do. Pergamum was also famous because its library, it was the second largest library in the ancient world, next to Alexandria. Our word parchment comes from Pergamum. Parchment is treated leather that people would write on. It was invented and used here in Pergamum, and the word still is used in English today, parchment. Beautiful thing here, this was not standing in John's day. This is the temple of the Roman Emperor Trajan. It was built about 20 years or so after the Revelation. Beautiful thin columns of very, very white marble. But this is my favorite part, the most acrophobic theater. It's the steepest theater in the whole ancient world, and it is really something. If you were up at the top here with your bag of popcorn and took a wrong step, it would be a long ride. And to make matters worse, you're about, at least 1,000 feet above the valley floor below. And so visually, it's must have been a scary place to go to hear Paul preach. Once again, would have been covered all over the place. Ancient cities were not open-air museums. Thyatira, I know your works, your love and faith and service and patient endurance, but that your latter works exceed the first. But I have this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself. All of these are metaphors, of course, using Old Testament images for things that they're doing wrong here. The prophetess and his teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. I gave her time to repent, but she refuses to repent of her sexual immorality. Behold, I will throw her into a sick bed, and those who commit adultery with her I will throw into great tribulation. All this is very strong language that the Lord uses. But the rest of you who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, To you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden, only to hold fast until I come. This is all you can say. This is in the Turkish town of Akşehir. There's a square here in the middle of town that has ruins here. Nothing has changed on this since the first time I went there in 1983, except the turtles have multiplied. They're the main attraction in that town. Our next one is Sardis. I know your works. You have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Not a compliment. Sardis is in a gorgeous, beautiful place here. Not much to the city itself. Here's a street, sidewalks. So a street on the right of this picture, sidewalk here, shops here like we've seen elsewhere. But this one has a gorgeously preserved Jewish synagogue. Now, what were Jews doing all over this area? They had migrated there in large groups, in some cases, in smaller groups in others. But from the period of time after the New Testament, within a couple of hundred years there, this synagogue was built, and it's a big, beautiful synagogue. Keeping the law of Moses' prohibition against making graven images, but oddly having these things that they actually took out of some Roman building and used them in their synagogue. Pretty cool. And right next door to it in Sardis is the gymnasium. A gymnasium was a regular academic institution, a college, but it was also one that included physical education as well. It's one of the loveliest buildings. But my favorite part is the Temple of Artemis, just outside of town. This beautifully built temple, never ever finished. Like so many of the ancient temples, the biggest ones, they never had enough money to finish them. This is what it looks like today. Big column drums. So our next one, so that was Sardis. Now we go to Philadelphia. I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. So the Lord has a powerful message to them. I took this picture in 1983. It was the first time I went there. It was a Roman wall. I don't know if it's even there now. It may have been, back in those days, these things weren't very well protected. But in the town, from after the time of the apostles, we have the remains of a massive Christian basilica that was built there, showing how the Christian message caught on. And these places were strong Christian cities. This one has a minaret of a mosque in the background. Strong Christian cities all the way up into some of these, all the way up into modern times. And one neat thing that one can be seen here and is seen in other places is olive trees growing in a vineyard. Okay? You plant olive trees occasionally in a vineyard. All right, our next one is Laodicea. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. I would that you either cold nor hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Now, the Lord's message here doesn't say that hot is bad or good, or that cold is bad or good. I think the Lord is saying, you're lukewarm, like he says. Now, this is interesting. So we're in the middle of a valley here. This is Laodicea here, in the middle of a valley. On one side of the valley, you have Hierapolis, which is a city built on hot springs. Those of you who are going on a trip are going to spend a night there, right? Built on hot springs. And on the other side of the valley, you have Colossae, which has cold springs. And in the middle, you have Laodicea, which is lukewarm. So you've seen this. You've seen streets like this before. You know what they look like now, don't you? This is a theater built on a hillside, a Greek-style theater, and this is actually a different theater. Laodicea has 2 theaters in it, one for the Democrats and one for the Republicans, facing different directions. So what's this? A hippodrome, which means what? Racetrack. Yep, still there. Then this thing, in the middle of town, there's this big glob of construction that doesn't look like anything. But here's what it is. It was the central water distribution of the city for the lukewarm water. You can see that this lukewarm water was full of calcium, and so every so often they would have to, you look at the pipes, you can see how it's calcified inside. So every so often they'd have to build another pipe on the outside of it. And that's how it turned into this conglomerate with its lukewarm, high calcium water. Now, Colossae's nearby. Does your trip go to Colossae?
Yes.
Colossae, gorgeous, beautiful place. It's a tell, it's a hill here in the valley. I wanted to show 2 favorite pictures of Colossae. The field is white, all ready to harvest. And then sometimes they harvest this stuff. They're opium poppies. I was there 1 year, so last time I was at Colossae, they were growing something else. This time it was wheat, and another occasion I went there, it was opium poppies. Now they're actually doing an excavation there. I don't know what they've found yet. And nearby is another city, Hierapolis. That is a beautiful place. You can see, you're familiar with all those. Now, we'll conclude with the promises. At the end of the messages to the 7 churches, here's what the Lord says. To the one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. How can you beat that? The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. The one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations, even as I myself have received authority from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. All this beautiful symbolic language to represent the promises the Lord makes for us. To the one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot his name out of the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. What more wonderful thing that could there be than Christ confessing your name before the Father? The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me. The one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. And it would be my prayer that we conquer, that we endure, as the Lord has challenged us to do, so that we can receive these promises. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Do you have any questions?
You have one on the internet.
So, Ken, when you answer questions, remember to repeat the question so that people on the internet will know what was asked.
You want to do the one on the internet? What were the roofs made of?
Slide 16.
Yeah.
I can get you there if you want.
No.
Okay.
Because we're missing roofs everywhere. The roofs were made out of ceramic clay. And so they were baked clay. And because of that, if they're exposed to enough crushing and earthquakes and crashing and water, they just turn into chunks of clay. So that's what the roofs were made of. Tile. I didn't include the word tiles. Some of those tiles still exist and can be seen, but you can imagine how many tiles about this big it took to roof the Roman Empire. Quite a few. Other questions?
Lot of slaves.
It seems in so many of the pictures you showed us, there's these very, very old ruins and then juxtaposed against just very modern buildings. And I'm wondering if there's, some seemed in remote places and others just right up next against a modern city. I don't know if the city's encroaching on these old places
Okay.
or if they're receding away from them. And if there's a attempt at preserving the spaces, or if people just are like, this is where we live now. We have this place now, we're building on it.
So the question has to do with the modern cities up against the ancient ruins. The Turks the Turks converted to Islam in the 900s. In the 1000s, they moved into what we now call Turkey, 10 and 1100s. And by the end of the 1100s, they were everywhere in what's now Turkey. And the Turks generally didn't go destroy cities. I don't know if they ever destroyed cities. What they would do is build a Turkish city next to the city. And in due time, the local Greek-speaking population there in many places would become Turkified, but not entirely. There were Greek speakers in Turkey all the way up into the 1900s when they were kicked out after World War I. There were hundreds of thousands of Greek-speaking people still there. So the Turks would often build their new cities adjacent to the local cities there. And as the economic shifts took place, or the people decided they want a better job in the Turkish city, a lot of these older Greek cities would just wither away, and their materials would be used for building materials for the next town. And about half the places that we talked about today still have the same names today that they did 2,000 years ago. And so in some of the big modern cities that I showed you, they actually, the government went in and removed the modern city so that they could excavate a little bit of ancient city there. So you have modern city encroaching a bit on ancient stuff, and then you have guys like me wanting the modern cities to de-encroach so more ancient stuff can be revealed. Thank you for the question.
How are they dating these ruins? How are they more accurate?
There's a lot of literary evidence from the Greek and Roman period. Lots of people writing about cities, plus they're actually quite dateable because so many of them have inscriptions that tell you what year of what Roman emperor was there. So the Roman world is really, really easy to date compared to, say, Mesopotamia or something.
Professor Jackson, remember to repeat the question.
Oh, the question was, how are they dating these things?
How do they deal with it, with the population change to a more Muslim population now? And some of these were, idol worshipers or Christian, or, how do they...
So the question is about the transition between pagan worshipers, Christians, Muslims today, and Jack Muslims as well today. Many Turks aren't religious at all. When Greek culture spread into what's now Turkey, so many of the local religious beliefs of the local population just kind of got sucked into the broader Greek religion. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, after the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, Constantine didn't prohibit the older pagan religions, but some of his successors in due time did. And so many people were more or less forced to become Christians over time. And that's why something as magnificent as the most beautiful of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, just is now a swamp, because it no longer meant anything to the Christians. And so they just used it as a quarry for stuff to build gutters and roads and sidewalks and things like that. And then when Islam moves in, there was a process of Islamification, as many local pagans and Christians in due time became Muslims. But again, there were hundreds of thousands of Greek-speaking Christians in what's now Turkey, all the way up until they were kicked out after World War I.
So what
At the same time, the Muslim Turks were kicked out of Greece, too.
So what percentage of the population in Turkey now is of what religion?
Turkey is virtually 100% Islamic. We have small LDS branches, and there are other things like that. But part of the deal at the end of World War II, when they carved up the Ottoman Empire, was to kick all the Muslims out of Greece, all the Christians out of Turkey, even Turkish-speaking Christians who identified themselves entirely as Turks got kicked out of Turkey into Greece, and that made Turkey virtually 100% Muslim. But Turkey's a very progressive Muslim country.
Which war? After
World War I.
One.
Yeah.
Just curious about those stone monuments that ended up in Berlin. Was that during the Nazi rise?
No. So the question is, how did the altar of Zeus end up in Berlin? No, it was sometime in the 19th century. I don't know what the date. So it was before the time of the Nazis. And of course, now there's a great deal of stress between European museums and the countries from whence they got all their best stuff.
All right, well, please join me in thanking Professor Jackson.
Thank you. I realize I made you miss Monday Night Football tonight.
Are we off the... Okay, well, I was just going to say, if you want to